Okay. All right, so what we're going to do B'siyata D'Shmaya today is as follows. We're going to finish off the Ramah. We're going to do the din of Shilya, and I decided we'll give ourselves one more Shabbos on the sugya of Maimid, so we won't start Maimid yet. We'll do the din of Achshevei and Dinei Atzamos. So today will probably be a little bit of a shorter shir. Okay, we had seen that the Ramah had 4 chumras of Ashkenaz, and we only saw one of them, and now let's pick up with the second one. So we'll be doing the last 3 today. The Ramah says, Od Kasav, Od Kasu, they also taught, this comes from the Isser V'Heter, De'ein la'arev mayim shedichu b'em kli basar im mayim, shedichu b'em kli chalav, v'litein lefnei behema ta'asurim bahana. The Ramah says that you should be careful not to mix water that was used to wash fleishik dishes with water that had been washed in a separate kli for milchik dishes, and then give it in front of an animal, because that water is asur b'hana. The water is basar b'chalav, and we know basar b'chalav is asur b'hana. So here we have a machlokis of how to read the case of the Ramah. What exactly was this case of the Isser V'Heter? But before we ask that question, what exactly the case is, we're going to go right away to Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Lamdasha issue. And in fact, this is going to set us up also for the sugya of Maimid. Keep in mind Rabbi Akiva Eiger's approach. And that Rabbi Akiva Eiger asks the following question. He asks, presumably over here, if the water is hot and you're cooking basar b'chalav, and that's why it's asur b'hana, then the Ramah should have said that what's asur is bishul. So asks Rabbi Akiva Eiger, kashali dim kain sifkat and tesvav Rabbi Akiva Eiger dim kain movad hana litzer la'arev mitam isur bishul. If you're worried about the hana of basar b'chalav, then you should also be worried about the fact that you're doing bishul. Answers Rabbi Akiva Eiger Yisod that we've said before. Yehuda and Yehuda Dov and I yesterday were discussing this Rabbi Akiva Eiger in detail. Yehuda Dov had a very interesting pshat in Rabbi Akiva Eiger. I thought about it more, and I'm going to say a different pshat. But let's see how it goes. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, V'ulai yesh lomar, D'mayri dahamayim shebeshnei hakelim hem shishim keneged harishon. Ella da asur la'arav lehanos mimenu. Wait, what do you have? Keneged after word keneged. Ma'ir da'mayim sheb'shnei kelim hem shishim keneged ha'echad or ha'iser? Ha'aleph. And what's the aleph? It means shishim. Presumably he means that there's shishim keneged ha'iser. I guess he means that there's shishim against the basar b'chalav. El da asur la'arav lehanos menu da havim vatlas l'chatchila. V'aser the dina de mevatlin rak le'in achila v'hana v'le'inyan mishol lo matzinu kain v'adayin tzarech iyun. Rabbi Akiva Eiger's answer, according to Rav Israel Orbach, and the way I had assumed as well, is based on a chidush Rabbi Akiva Eiger has that we mentioned in the Hakdama Shir on Kuf Ches Amid Aleph, as well as in his Shailos Utshuvas in Siman Reish Zayin. I'm going to first say the chidush. And the best place to see it, I photocopied for you both Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Chidushim as well as the Tshuva, but the best place to see it is going to be the Tshuva, and this is going to set us up also for Monday in Mirza Hashem. Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Yisod is as follows. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that there should be no problem to add chalav to a case of basar when the basar is 60 times the chalav, the amount of chalav that you're putting in. In a moment we'll explain why. The answer to the kasha of why is there no bishul is because Rabbi Akiva Eiger says the ukimta is that if we have a little bit of leftover milchiks in the basin that you washed milchiks, and in the fleishik basin you have a little bit of fleishiks left over, then the odds are that the water itself is going to be 60 times the amount of basar b'chalav you're going to have, even if it's hot. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that there's no problem of Ein Mevatlan L'Chatchila. Now, objectively, there should be a problem of Ein Mevatlan L'Chatchila. Because, for example, let's say you had a nevela soup, and you added a tremendous amount of water into the soup to the point that you won't taste the nevela inside of it. Nevertheless, that's Ein Mevatlan L'Chatchila. Nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva Eiger is mechadesh that there is no problem of Ein Mevatlan L'Chatchila. So that's the case, that there's 60 times. What's the pshat? Why is that so? So that's the lumdus that we've spoken about in the past. The lumdus is that when it comes to the isser of bishul, basar, bchalav, it's only, the isser only starts when you have tam basar and tam chalav that come together. But the isser doesn't exist at all until that happens. So therefore, in this case, if you're making it not happen, so then in such a case, then it would not be a problem. Rabbi Akiva Eiger writes this, I said, in the Chidushim. If you take a look in the Tshuva, if you understand this Matov Manoim, Rabbi Akiva Eiger's question, if you don't, we're going to come back to it anyhow. But I just want to show you the context in which Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Tshuva talks about this. The Shaila was on the following. Take a look at the Shaila that's written to Reb Simcha. Al Hagvino Shemamid Nosam Ba'ar Kevas Kshera. That we're going to learn the sugya of Maimid, and that is the halacha is you're not allowed to put cheese inside of the keva of an animal if there is the rennet is going to be adding enough meat that's going to create the tam basar b'chalav. So hamaimid, take a look. There's a Mishnah in Chulin. Hamaimid bar kevas ksher yesh b'nois and tam asura. V'haleka and tam mutter. Umad lo aser bidin maimid. Now maimid is aser even if it's not nosein tam, because maimid is so powerful that even if you're not going to, if what's happening is that the stomach of the animal that produces the rennet is causing the cheese to curdle, even if it doesn't give tam inside, that's enough to create the isser of maimid. So the question is, why does the Mishnah say it's only b'nosein tam? What about the din maimid? Hari migash nosein tam. The maimid b'isser hu d'lo batel. Avlo shavya basar b'chalav ayidei maimid lo. So the Rimigash, which we will discuss in the future, says that the halacha is that you don't have a problem of maimid by basar b'chalav, that even a kolshu is aser. V'hachi paskin v'shulchan aruch, etc. However, Rabbi Akiva Eiger gives another answer. Hine, skip down to the next paragraph. Hine yesh lomar, the basar b'chalav b'yeshishim lav mitin bittelhu. Kivan the kol echa b'fnei atzon mutter v'isur al yidei chiburin yachad lo shayich inyan bittel. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that there isn't going to be a problem of ein mevatlin isur l'chatchila when you are putting in, the moment in which you're putting in the cheese inside to curdle, maybe there, even if it's not a problem of being aser b'kolshu, but what about the fact that you're being mevatel isur l'chatchila? That's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger is bothered by. So it says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, there isn't a problem when it comes to ein mevatel isur l'chatchila. Why? So he says, el di isur, skipping down towards the end of the paragraph, eino maschel el b'derech nesinas tam. So the moment we accept the Rimigash's Yesod, where the Rimigash says that at the end of the day, when it comes to the Isser of Maimid, we're not going to be concerned about the Isser Kolshu. The only question is Shishim, and here where you don't have Shishim, it's going to be Mutter. It won't be a problem because you never had Basar b'chalav. If you have Shishim of the Chalav connected the Basar, or vice versa. Because the Isser is Dafka Yidei Bishul, as we've discussed in the past. Okay, so this is Rabbi Akiva Eiger's Yisod. That's what we saw, that's what he's answering over here in his Hagos, and that's what he says in the Tshuva in Reish Zayin. It's also in his Chidushim. Again, this is a way to start thinking about Maimid. We're not doing the Sugya yet, but that was where Rabbi Akiva Eiger was starting from. The only thing is, Rabbi Akiva Eiger then asks on himself, if that would be so then the halacha should be that should even be mutter to be mevatel the Isser vis-a-vis achila and hana as well. if you take a look at Rabbi Akiva Eiger by us, what did Rabbi Akiva Eiger say? In our sugya, the halacha is that when you're mixing the water together, so then there's not going to be a problem of bishul about a mevatl nisur chatchila, but there is a problem of a mevatl nisur chatchila on the achila and the hana. And then the question becomes obvious. The question is, Mamadavshach, if you're saying that there's no chefza basar b'chalav and there's no problem of ein mevatl nisur chatchila, then the same should apply to achila and hana. So to this, Rabbi Akiva Eiger on the next page finishes off in the tshuva what was missing over here in what he wrote over here in the chidushim. And that is that he says as follows. He says, Valkein, kivan de bishar isurim asar la'arev, asur gam bebasar b'chalav. When it comes to shar isurim that have an isur achila, so then they extended the isur of ein mevatl nisur chatchila to basar b'chalav, because if you would allow people to mix when it comes to basar b'chalav and then eat, then they would come to do it when it comes to the nevela case. In the nevela case, it's going to be asur. However, when it comes to bishul, there is no bishul by all other machalos asuras. So there's no need to make the gzeira of ein mevatl nisur chatchila when it comes to basar b'chalav, like when it comes to shari surim. He must be assuming also that the hana is connected to the achila, because by nevela you don't have nisra hana. Well, there are some machalos asuras that are asur b'hana, most of them are not. So he must be assuming that hana is really just an extension of an achila, and this is Rabbi Akiva Eiger's answer to the kashas. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that it's meduyak, that the Rishonim that said that you're not allowed to mix these waters together, even though you're doing bishul, and the gzeira should also be atu bishul. No, the issue is litin lefnei behema da aser bahana, and it's Rabbi Akiva Eiger's hesber's lishitaso that holds that there's no problem of ein mevatlin isur lechatchila when it comes to bishul basar b'chalav. When it comes to achila and hana, then that would be a problem, and hence everything is meduyak in the Ramah according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger. This Shita Rabbi Akiva Eiger is not quoted by most of the poskim, but you should know it is a fascinating Shita that we've already made a big deal about. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Comes along the Shach in Sivkot and Yutes, and the Shach also says that we're talking about hot water. And what we're going to do is see two pshatim and how to read the Ramah. Rabbi Akiva Eiger was coming off of the Shach, and we're going to argue today that there might be another way to read the Ramah aside from the Shach's way. Says Rabbi Akiva Shach, "Hainu kishedicham mayim roschim v'irvam kach roschim halav hachi ein aser b'anat kimin de'ein aser min haTorah ela derech bishul." Says the Shach, the only way to understand this case is that we're talking about hot water, and then it's going to come lidei isur basar b'chalav. But if we're talking about the water is already cold, so then in such a case you don't have basar b'chalav doraisa. If it's only kavush, so then it's going to only be an isur d'rabbanan. If it's only an isur d'rabbanan, we learned in Sif Aleph and Sif Gimel that the halacha is isur d'rabbanan are mutter bahana. However, Rabbi Akiva Eiger himself, after going with the Shach's assumption and giving the chidush that he gave, he points out that the Minchas Yaakov disagrees. Let's start with Rabbi Akiva Eiger and work backwards. At the end of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Minchas Yaakov kasa d'mayir she'einu roschim va'af kimin lo avederach bishul muter hana mikol makom asar la'arei biyadayim lehenos mimenu. A fascinating shita, and that is that even if you're not creating a chefza basar b'chalav, nevertheless, it's asar la'arei biyadayim lehenos mimenu. It's still asar to mix cold water together. That is also going to be problematic. Now, Rabbosai, I am partial, as fantastic. You know, there's no one like the Shach and Rabbi Akiva Eiger. But at the end of the day, I am partial to the Minchas Yaakov's pshat, because if we look up the Isser V'Heter seems to be closer to Minchas Yaakov, and I've told you that I'm very taken by the methodology of the Yad Yehuda. I think the Yad Yehuda is a fantastic, fantastic sefer. It used to be in hieroglyphics. It was impossible to read. It's one of his descendants just reprinted it, and it's now a beautiful sefer. Our Beis Medrash does not have the new edition. It has only the old edition. I have the new edition at home. I'm really taken by the Sefer Yad Yehuda. As I described to you before, his methodology is he goes through all the chumras of the Ramah, and for that matter, the chumras in the Mechaber as well, and tries to dig in precisely what exactly was the case of the Rishonim. A lot of times you'll have an arichos from the Shach and the Taz, but you won't be sure exactly what the case is. So what he does is he chased down, 100 years ago, he chased down all of these Sfarim, and he, a lot of times, is machriya based on a precise reading of the Chachmei Ashkenaz. He pins down the halacha. Let me just finish, Mike, and then it'll be my pleasure to take your question. So the Yad Yehuda already points out that if you look up, so let's do what he does instead of just reading inside. If you take a look in the Isser V'Heter that you have after, where is it, on which page? It's right after Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Chidushim. If you take a look in the Isser V'Heter, Klal Lamed Sif Vav, he says as follows. He says there were some who were mekel. Yesh matirin lechatchil litem behema mehadacha kol she'er basar v'chalav tzon b'kli echad. There were some who were mekel to give their animals the leftovers of meat and milk. Va'afal pi shasharu yachan me'es la'es, and even if they were soaked together, me'achar shemutar ba'anah, because it's mutar ba'anah, because even if it was kavush, it would not be a problem. So notice, Rabbosai, the topic of this Heter is not hot water, but water that has been sitting together. Va'ol me'achar shein v'atzav b'chalav mamish. V'yesh machmirim ligro mia tzonein basar b'chalav lichatchila. But there are some who are machmir not to be gorem, cold meat and cold milk together. V'hamachmir shelo l'shafcham b'kli yachad ela b'zachar zeh. And they're machmir not to mix them together. So the Yad Yehuda points out that over here the lashon is v'yesh machmir ligro miatzonei basar b'chalav. So this wild chumrah of the Minchas Yaakov is really found in the Kadmonim already prior. It was not something the Minchas Yaakov made up, and it seems to me that it was a custom in Ashkenaz never to mix meat and milk, because you never know what's going to happen next. You never know what's going to happen next. So since you don't know what's going to happen next, we're going to be machmir, not to be gorim. The Yad Yehuda then asks, but if you look in this Heter did not say it's aser ba'anah. This Heter just said that you shouldn't mix them together when you're feeding your animals. But he didn't say it's aser to feed the animals. So he says very geshmak. He said that we saw already, it's a chumrah al gabe chumrah, but we did see, if you remember the way Rav Miller said it, he said it's not pashut at all that when it comes to the Isur D'Rabbana Basar B'chalav, that's mutar b'hana. There are Rishonim who hold not that way. There's a Rabbi Akiva Eiger that we skipped that was marich, that was connected to the Sugya of Maimid, again Rabbi Akiva Eiger by Maimid, that pointed out that there are many Rishonim who hold that even if it's Asar Midrabbanan, it's going to be Asar B'hana. So says the Yad Yehuda in Sifkatan Tesvav, says the Yad Yehuda, you put the two together, Dainu, that what started out was a minig that the Isser Heter said that people don't mix the two together, because in Ashkenaz they were machmir never to create a mixture of basar b'chalav. You don't know what's going to happen afterwards. And if it's kavush, so then it's going to be basar b'chalav midrabbanan. And there's also shittas who hold that which is asar midrabbanan is asar b'hana. So of course now that will help us understand why the Ramah says that we don't have to be di'evid it's mutter, and that Ramah has this interesting line. Now we understand why they're chumras ba'alma. Everything makes sense. We're not talking about an iser d'oraisa of bishul basar b'chalav, and even though there's no one greater than the Shach as a commentator on a Shulchan Aruch, Libi Omer Li, that this is Amita Shel Torah in terms of what the chumrah of the Ramah was. Okay, so that is chumrah number 2. Yeah.
How does the Shach understand that it's a chumrah on the Ramah? Because if it's really
Ein Chanami. Right. So what we're going to do is the Badei Shulchan does a very nice job. After we finish, the Badei Shulchan goes through each one and tells us why he thinks each one is just a chumrah ba'alma. And so when we get there, let's see if we have something good or we don't. We'll see what happens. Okay, so this is chumrah number 2. Yes?
So just to clarify about
Sure.
Akiva Eiger, so when he said that you could be like pour milk on l'chatchila on the meat, that was only in the Havamina?
So he was saying that that would only be mutter b'toras bishul, but not.
Then practically like.
Right. So then it's only right. It's in terms of achila and ano. If you're going to, if your intention is to get benefit from it, it's going to be problematic. That's what comes out. Yeah. He says it's only for bishul, and for hana and achila, that's going to be problematic. Your pshat was also quite interesting. The way I'm saying it is the way, by the way, Rav Israel Orbach, who's one of the poskim here in the neighborhood, we're both say we're sitting in we're sitting in a very, very special place. Down the block, Rav Asher Weiss gives shir, and down this direction somewhere is Chevron, and there's a lot of very, very special Torah that's going along, right in within 2-3 miles of where we're sitting, and this is also a very special Makom Torah as well. This classroom, Miller Shlita taught Isser Heter for many, many years. And Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal said shir here for the last few years. So it's a lot of, you're surrounded by a lot of special things. Anyhow, Rav Shlomo Zalman's son is a big posek in the neighborhood. He had Rav Israel, so he has Sfarim on Isser Heter called Levushei Oz. They're very. So when I was Mesupik, after I left the Beis Medrash, discussing with the Yehudas, so I checked up over there, and then he convinced me what seems to me now to be the pshat in Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Okay, so 3 Chumrah number 3. So says the Ramah as follows: Old Kasvu Takli she'osim bo mayim lechafifas harosh ein l'shamish bo do'osin osam me'efer shala kira uregilus ulis arav sham basar v'chalav. Third chumrah is that the utensil that's used to make shampoo. Now, in those days, the critical ingredient in shampoo that created the cleansing agent, how it was a cleansing agent is an interesting question, was ash. Ash was the cleansing agent that was used in shampoo. Time to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we live in the generation that we live in. We have, it's so special how much easier and how much more comfortable life is than it used to be. So the Ramah says that they would use the ash. Now this ash, remember, was sitting on the bottom of the oven, and it was sitting on the bottom of the oven, and inside would fall basar v'chalav. So now you take this ash that has bits and pieces of basar b'chalav, and you cook it to make your shampoo. So that kli is going to be aser. That kli is going to be aser. Don't use that kli for your basar b'chalav. Okay, they didn't have a lot of kalim. Kani read that the same kli that they used for their shampoo, they would use to cook food as well. Says the Shach in Sifkat and Chaf, a good kasha. The Shach says, wait a second, if you're concerned about the basar b'chalav, that's going to make the kli aser, so what about the shampoo itself? Shouldn't the shampoo also become aser because you cooked the shampoo with basar b'chalav? And the halacha is that basar b'chalav is aser b'hana. So now you have shampoo with tam basar b'chalav that should be aser b'hana. So here, the Shach says a very important yesod that you should file away. Says the Shach, he asks our kasha, Rabbosai, no jewel be left behind? Everything's clear? What's going on? Beautiful. Says the Shach, then the shampoo should also be aser. It shouldn't only be a problem to cook. Kivan she'ena davar shalachila, lo chashiv hana, Kivan she'eno nene migufa iser. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger that says a Shach that you're not being nene from the gufa iser. That at the end of the day, you are being nene from the afer. If we were talking about that the basar b'chalav nowadays, the shampoos have flavors inside, right? This is a lemon shampoo and this is a peach shampoo and so on and so forth, and somehow you were getting hana ein chanami, then it would be a problem. But no one in those days was, remember, it was ash that they were washing their heads with. So at the end of the day, they weren't focusing on the good smell or the good feel that the basar b'chalav was giving them on their head. So memela, so it's true, it has basar b'chalav, but you're not getting hana from it. You're not being nene from the Gufa Isser. And the Shach says we see this in Sif Gimel, in Tzadi Daled. Take a look in Sif Tzadi Daled where you have this. The case is the following. We have a pot that's Asr. We'll discuss why when we learn Tzadi Daled. And you're not allowed to get Hana from it. But the Mechaber concludes, Ach muter laseis l'socha peiros otzonein kimin she'eina nene migufa yisr. This is an important halacha. That even if you have a pot that is Asr and needs Hagala, nevertheless, there's no problem of putting something cold. Yes, there is a big question about could you go to a not kosher restaurant and eat food that's cold on a non-kosher dish. Don't try it until you do the very long shach that we will get to in Siman Tzadi Aleph. But technically, if you're not nene migufa iser, then it's not a problem. So you could have something that's treif. You're allowed to put fruit on it. It's not going to be a problem. So the shach has a sharp zushtel. He says just like the halacha is that's considered ein nene migufa iser. You're not being nene from the tam basar bchalav over there. So too over here, you're not being nene at all from the tam basar bchalav and the ash. Therefore, says the shach ein nene miguf iser. Tov. So that is the shach's explanation over here of what's going on. There is a question over here. And that is the Kresi Uplesi raises in Sif Katan Tezvav. Kresi Uplesi raises the following question. He says, is it really pashut that's the only reason why there shouldn't be a problem of using the shampoo? At the end of the day, you could argue that the whole thing is pogum. That the basar b'chalav is with ash. If the basar b'chalav is with ash, so then in such a case, then maybe the basar b'chalav has tam pogum. And that's the reason why the halacha is that there's no problem. And if that would be so then in such a case, then the kli also should be mutter. So, but the Yad Yehuda actually advances this argument. The place he will get back to in a moment, we'll see how he adjusts. But the Yad Yehuda says like this, no! The reason why the ash is mutter, we don't even need to use a lamdas of Eina Nene Migufa Yisr. Says the Yad Yehuda, at the end of the day, you cooked Basar Bchalav. Before the Basar Bchalav even came together, there was Tam Pogum in between them. And even if the Yad Yehuda says that it first became Basar Bchalav and then the ash is cooked with it, so you're not getting Hana from Basar Bchalav because everything is Pogum. Therefore, the Yad Yehuda suggests an interesting ukimta. He says that the reason why the shampoo is mutter is because any Hana you're going to get from Basar Bchalav is already from Tam Pogum. If that's so then what's the Ramos Chash at the end of the day? The Kli itself shouldn't be Aser because what went into the Kli is Tam Pogum. He says in Ukimta, he says the ash was enough to make the Tam Basar B'chalav Pogum when you're using the ash, but whether there was enough ash that went into the walls of the Kli to make it Pogum, that maybe there isn't. So there's a chash that there was enough tam basar b'chalav that went into the walls that will make a basar b'chalav, but not enough ash that would make the tam coming out of the wall. Okay, you could be mefakbek and say memanavshach. If there was enough tam in the shampoo to make it already pogum, then presumably the same thing over there. You could take a look at the Yad Yehuda. That's in Tez Zayin. But that's his approach. The Placey has another approach. The Placey says a chidush. I just want to share with you that you should know this chiddush. The Sif Seidas quotes in the Sif Katan Yudches, the second half of Sif Katan Yudches. The place he holds that the halacha is that if you have Basar Bchalav and you add a davar apogim inside of it afterwards, so then in such a case, the halacha would be that it would still be asar as Basar Bchalav, even though the tam was being pogim it. I'll remind you of the Rambam that we discussed of ira davar mar, that the Rambam holds that if you mix something mar into Basar Bchalav, it could still be Basar Bchalav, except that shelo kederech hanasan. So this is a very mechudesh dika placey. A lot of ink has been spilled. The poskim generally don't paskin like this placey, but you should know I photocopied and I put it in the new edition from the placey. I put it in the booklet, but the placey suggests that at the end of the day, the fact that there was tam pogum that's put in afterwards is not going to affect it. So the placey then has to be mechalek and say that the afer itself, that was bishul bo basar chalav, it wasn't derech bishul. But when it comes to what it went inside, even if it was tam pogum that went inside, so then that's going to be aser. How the placey reconciles the problem that the shach was bothered by, I just alluded to it with not derech bishul. You should know that the placey though holds the fact that there was pagam going inside the walls, since it first was mixed with basar b'chalav, and then the ash only came in afterwards, so then he's choshesh for that problem. I'd rather put the placey on side as a mar mokom ani lecha. I'll put the placey on the side. Take a look. The pshatim that we're going to work with and the pshatim that the poskim work with are either the shach's mahalach or the Yad Yehuda's mahalach. You should know that the placey does learn that there are times that if you have basar b'chalav and then you're mosif nosin tam lefkam, it'll still be aser. What's his ukimta of exactly what's going on and how he cooked the shampoo? Ayin sham. I don't want to get involved with the details, especially because we're not choshish for malacha. But he does. This shita makes its royal appearance over here. The Pri Megadim quotes this placey in Sifkat and Yudches. He quotes it Tzemach Tzedek. A lot of ink has been spilled on this chiddush. It's a fascinating chiddush. Do you equate it to Ira Davar Mar or not? And maybe Basar B'chalav is unique, that if the Basar B'chalav was created and then only afterwards the Davar HaPogim comes in, it could be that it would still be problematic. We'll discuss during Seder the placey. Just want to point out that Rav Nebenzahl, when he was teaching me these halachos, said to me that he found many of these chumras difficult because he said the odds are that we were talking about it being cooked in a kli sheni, not in a kli rishon. So if these cases are in a kli sheni, so then in such a case, there are many shittas who hold that there isn't even blios of basar b'chalav. We mentioned the Rajba in the past that kli sheni is maflet to boleya, but there are shittas that hold not that way. Rav Nebenzahl was bothered by that, so I found that Eina Chanami, the Sifsei Das, makes that point, and he has to say that we're talking about in the Shach, we're talking about it was a Kli Rishon, or you go according to Shitos that Kli Sheni is Maflit Umavliya. So that's a Kimta that L'chura you're going to have to learn over here. That was Chumrah number 3. Chumrah number 4 of the Ramah is as follows. Yes.
Is the shach assuming that the basar b'chalav ashes that are in the shampoo are not going to get into the walls of the kli? Because otherwise, assuming that they do get into the walls, otherwise why would the same star not follow through when you're using the kli to then cook other food?
That's right. So he's going to have to assume, correct, he's going to have to, that the ashes is not going to affect enough to make the kedera mutter, because the concern is that the kedera is going to be mutter. You're going to have to assume on something along the lines of Yad Yehuda that it's going to give off its tam.
The ashes they're going to get, and that's going to get into the walls of the kli?
No, because if the ashes are going to ruin the tam basar b'chalav, so then what's the problem with the kli? Unless you go like the placey.
The shach is assuming whatever basar b'chalav is in the shampoo ends up getting into the walls of
correct.
the kli.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. That's correct. That gets into the walls of the kli. Number 4, v'lachein, and therefore, since we have this basar b'chalav, problem. Gam kein l'shtamish min akdeir shel atanurim shebeis achor mishum denatzim aleim lepon basar v'chalav min akdeir shemvashim betanur. So now that we've already seen that there's basar v'chalav dancing around on this ash, how do you know that there hasn't been basar v'chalav that the goyim are cooking with that fall into the Jews' ketera? By the way, interestingly, the Ramah himself mentions this chumrah in the Darkei Moshe, but he tells us why we could be mekel. Take a look. Let's see if we could find this Ramah in the Darkei Moshe. Yeah. The Ramah, by the way, in the Darkei Moshe Aleph, doesn't mention these chumras in the order that he does in his Hagos on Shulchan Aruch. So this chumrah starts with Kosav, Dibra Maskal Kosav, and he quotes this, and then he says, "Umedinas elu nogim bayin heter." He says, "We're not machmir that we allow people to put their kosher meat into ovens that have non-kosher." Leaving aside, of course, we have to discuss in the right time zeya and reicha, etc. But leaving that concern, the concern of basar v'chalav jumping in, v'atam now mishum nirali mishum da'ein lochush lahachzik reisa b'davar delo chayzinan. So this becomes an important yisod in chazakas. He says we're not machzik reisa b'davar delo chayzin. Just because you have a concern, if you didn't see it happen, you don't have to be choshesh. By the way, put this in your pocket, Rabbosai. Every once in a while, a baal bas or a woman's going to say, "I'm afraid that something might have fallen. I didn't see it fallen, but maybe it fell in. It's possible it fell in." So this is a hachra of the Ramah that, and it's a yisod in chazakas that we're not machzik reisa b'davar delo chayzin. If you didn't see this happen, so then in such a case, then you don't have to be concerned. Now, if there's a 90% likelihood, that's a totally different story. But stam achshash ba'alma, and that, of course, working backwards, that the Badei HaShulchan says is the reason why the Ramah concludes, u'b'di'eved ein lochish b'chol zeh, v'af l'chila ein bazeh l'chumras ba'alma, v'hamekel lo hifsid. So the idea is that there would be some type of precious that would be appropriate if one followed the chumras, but at the end of the day, certainly b'di'eved, but not only b'di'eved, in many instances, one could even be mekel lechatchila. Now let's work backwards. We took care of the fourth chumrah in the Ramah. Why it's just a chumrah? Because we're not machzik or reisa. But let's go through why would it be that on the other three cases we could be mekel. Now we've discussed many svaras together on all four of these chumras, and what I'm going to do is just learn it with you from the Badei HaShulchan's perspective. So the Badei HaShulchan in Sifkat and Sadi Daled, halfway through your booklet, goes through every single one of these chshashas. So 4 lines from the top, 3 lines from the top. Shebedina rishon in chitoi tachas kederes nachri yesh kam sveikos bedavar. So the first chshash again was that you can't stoke under the goy's pot, because you might come to me mevashal basar b'chalav chada shemelo bishal b'chalav me'olam b'ha'kedera. So first of all, how do you know that this was a milcha kli? There's meat that's cooking there now, and we're going to go with the Pri Megadim that says that cooking meat in a milchak dika pot is going to be an iser bishul daraisa. But how do you know that this was a milchak dika pot? So that's reason number 1, that this is a chumrah ba'alma. O shemelo bishul ba b'asar me'olam, or there isn't meat there. Va'od shafil bishul ba me'min hashem shemelo bishul ba mitoch leis leis. How do you know also that even if it was a milchak pot that was used for 24 hours, then it's eina ben yomo. Va'od, and another reason this first chumrah is a chumrah ba'alma shem yeshishim mashim v'ashal achshav keneged abelua. And maybe the Pri Megadim had learned that we're talking about a milchak dika pot and a fleishik dika piece of meat. Maybe there's shishim of the meat against the tam coming out of the walls. Kain kosav achsam sofer. That's what the achsam sofer writes. So that's many different reasons why chumrah number 1 is a chumrah. What about the Ramah who had said to be careful not to pour the kli chalav and the pi basar together? So here I like his pshat very much. And that is, he also was taken by the Yad Yehuda. We looked up and we found that's an Isser V'Heter. So clearly this was a Chumrah of Ashkenaz, of mixing meat and milk together. And in such a case, one could be Mekel B'di'eved, and one could say that's a chumra b'alma. He then leaves off, though, a kasha, according to the shach. That's Micah's question. According to the shach, it learns that it is hot, and you've got real basar b'chalav, so why is it that you could be mekel? Skipping down to the line, that first word on the line is harama. Avol fia pirush rishon sheveinu sham. That's the shach that says that's hot. Yesh la'ayin lama yoyech shash. And then he says there's an Aruch HaShulchan Micah who attempts to answer. He says, but I don't understand the Aruch HaShulchan's teretz. That's what Rav Cohen said. Ulinyan adin ashlishi, in regards to the chumrah, the third chumrah, shein l'shtamish b'kter shemechamim bo mayim l'chafif v'shem esari v'efer nosam v'basa v'chalav, pirush baruch HaShulchan shemedina n'achoshan is that shevadei kfar nisrav kol alech luchis. He says that, come on, the odds are that there's no real significant, there might be basa v'chalav, but that there's enough moisture of basar b'chalav when it's sitting there in the ash to create real time basar b'chalav. So then in such a case, he says that would be, it's not likely that there's anything going to be left. He does ask a kasha. The halacha is that basar b'chalav, its afer is also, its afer is also aser. You have to get rid of its afer. So he says, Yeshlam t'chshash basar b'chalav kan hu lebasar tzalul kirotav. But you could say that even everything is gone once it's there. I would say it's more likely the pshat. It's simpler to even say the Aruch HaShulchan's pshat, 3 lines from the bottom. That the odds are that everything over here is nos and tam lefkam. You'll only get stuck according to places chumrah, but we don't pass like the places chumrah, and therefore that's why all 4 of these are chumras ba'alma. The last one is that we're not machzik b'reyes. Okay, we finally got through all the chumras of Ashkenaz. Sif Zayin. In order to understand Sif Zayin, we should see the basic Gemara that's quoted by the Beis Yosef. In Pei Zayin in the Tur, we have the following halacha. The Tur says, "Hamavashel shlil b'chalav." If you cook an embryo in milk, in other words, there's the embryo from a goat. That's and included in that is what we would call a fetus, and so you have the fetus of a goat that was cooked with milk. Chayiv, that's nisur d'oraisa. V'chein ha'ochlo, and so too someone eats it. Hamavashel shilya, a shilya is a placenta. Believe it or not, Rabbi Basar, we're going to get to halacha l'maisa in this. A placenta would be the placenta being the sac that the fetus sits in, or the leather or the skin. V'gidin v'atzamos, v'ikrei karnaim, or the hooves, v'tilfayim harakim, and the soft parts of the hooves, b'chalav potter, v'cheina ochlan is going to be potter. So here the Beis Yosef points out that this is the Gemara, the same Gemara of a mevashel b'mei chalav. We already learned that mevashel b'mei chalav is going to be potter. So, and we pointed out that might not include nesuvei chalba. The Beis Yosef says nesuvei chalba is mamish chalav itself. That's a machlokes rishonim. So whether we hold it's mei chalav or it's mei chalav, at the end of the day, the language that's used is potter. So the Shach points out in Sif Katan Chav Beis. Now let's take a look at the Shach. The Shach says, Hachanami Isura Mia'ika, but all of these things are going to have an Isur D'Rabbanan. So now let's read in the Shulchan Aruch. Once we have that Shach's definition, the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Zayin says, Hamevashel Shlil B'chalav Chayiv V'chein Ochlo. Avamevashel Shilya or V'gidim Atzons Ikrei Karnayim V'tilfayim Harakim Potter V'chein ha'ochlam potter. All of those cases are going to be potter. So we have to discuss 2 things here in Siv Zayin that become 2 topics. One is the topic of shilya, and the other is the topic of atzamos. Because we saw that if you cook with atzamos, then it's going to be basar b'chalav midrabanan. So those are going to be the next 2 sugyas for a shorter day. So, the case of shilya, it's important to note that here what emerges is the placenta with milk is going to be an Isser D'Rabbanan, according to the way the Shach interprets based on what we saw in the Beis Yosef. However, if you take a look in Simin Pei Aleph, a placenta is not considered meat. Where does this come up? So, in the question of Hayotze min ha'aser aser, and, which is what Simin Pei Aleph is about, and Basar behema tmeya, the Mechaber says as follows, Pei Aleph Dalid, Shilya shachamor notzer bo mutter. If you have the placenta of a donkey, it's mutter de pirsha ba'alma. It's considered pirsha ba'alma. What we're going to talk about today, really, these next two topics are in Pei Aleph. There are things that we call pirsha, things that are considered just, they're not part of the animal itself. What would be the best English word to use for pirsha? It's a word that's sitting on the tip of my tongue. I'm not coming up with it.
Extremity?
Now, I'm thinking of something like that.
External?
Externals. Okay, we'll call it pirsha. Until we come up with the right English word. Pirsha b'alma is... Pirsha could also, when it comes to dung, we use the term excrement, but it's a discharge. That's the word I'm looking for. It's just considered. It's just a lefrosh is to discharge. So it's a discharge. It's just a discharge that comes out of the animal. It's not considered the Basar hachamor itself. So what's interesting is what emerges is the following: that on the one hand, when it comes to the Isser Basar Behema Tmeya, the halacha is that's considered discharge, and technically it's going to be mutter. Now, why would anybody want to have a Yetzer Hara to eat the placenta of a donkey? So stay tuned, okay? But at the end of the day, that's going to be Heter Gomur. But when it comes to the Shilya with Chalav, the halacha is that it's going to be asr. I asked Reb Ben Narsh why he thought that this was so. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Why would it be that it would be considered basar midrabanan to create basar b'chalav? Yet when it comes to basar behema tmei, it's not considered basar. It's not considered basar at all. It should even be mutter. And I wanted to argue that the pashtus of the Rishonim is that the Rishonim only said that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan when it comes to Mechalav. When it comes to Mechalav, we've already saw that there are Rishonim who hold that it's Mamish Chalav itself. In other words, the Rishonim who held that if it's Nesiu Bechalva, then it's Mamish Chalav. So then the Rishonim who hold that Nesiu Bechalva is not considered real Chalav. So, but nevertheless, Midrabanan, it looks like Chalav, it smells like Chalav, so it's the top of the yogurt. Where exactly in the yogurt it is, in brisk, where they're going to cut off the mutter or aser and so on. But at the end of the day, it's Mamish, it's the Leben itself. So then I understand then why you would have a Din D'Rabbanan. But if we're talking about Shilya, and we know that in Hilchos Shilya, it's already not considered meat, why would you say that it's aser midrabanan? And again, this is the Shach's usage of the Beis Yosef, and more precisely the Tosas and the Rosh and Kuf Yudalid that say that Mechalav is going to be Asur Midrabanan. So the Shach assumes that the same is going to apply to Shilya as well. Okay, it's a little bit of a chiddush, but that's what comes out according to the Shach. So what is the svar? So Ben Narsh suggested the following svar. He said that when it comes to the milk that's cooked with a shilya, so someone cooked milk with a shilya, and then he drank the milk. So then it had tam shilya, but at the end of the day, that looks like food. So then people might think, wait a second, that a shilya could create that a shilya with milk is going to be mutter min haTorah, and they'll think that also a shlil is also not only the placenta but even the fetus, because that's something that people normally eat. However, when it comes to the shilya itself, that's mamish not normal. No one would think of the shilya itself as being basar, as being basar. I think the kasha is stronger than the teretz. It's not Reb Ben Narsh's fault. It's the shach's fault. At the end of the day, you have to say some type of lamdus that at the end of the day, there's more of a reason to make a gzeira on a shilya with chalav than it is on the shilya itself when it comes to basar behema tmei. In other words, basar behema tmei, the pirsha ba'alma, there's no reason to make a gzeira. But once you're talking about a concoction of two things that are heter, so that come together, then people might be more likely to confuse with basar b'chalav, but adayin tzarachian what exactly the pshat is. But this is what comes out. Now, I used to skip this halacha until I got the following shayla. My first time I did Basar Bchalav, I just skipped the halachas Hashilya. Why are we talking about placenta with milk when the world's going on? So Rabbi say there is something wild that is going on in the world today, and I got it as a live shayla. And that is, for some reason, there are people that think that a woman who's just given birth, who imbibes the placenta, they dry out the placenta, and a woman eats, the mother who gave birth to the kid eats it. I had a student whose wife was into these things. He's normal. And she was also normal. I was about to say I thought she was normal, but she's a very fine person. There's some people believe that there's special proteins and special this and that, so they dry it out. They make it into a pill. It's not. They don't take the placenta itself, but they turn it into a pill. There's a process that's done, and they believe that's very, very healthy. The placenta is a fascinating thing. The placenta is used to test the genetic makeup of the fetus, and inside of the placenta is both the genetic makeup of the mother and the baby. So this comes up in genetic. If they're concerned that the baby is sick, for example, Tay-Sachs and cystic fibrosis. So what they will do is they will take from, it's called CVS, chorionic villi sampling. They'll take from the villi of the placenta. They'll take from there are a few different types of tests, and they test the placenta itself, and they can chemically differentiate between what's the mother's genetic material and the baby's genetic material. The mila is that the moment you're going to try to go and actually test the fetus's tissue, the fetus is tiny. So the moment that you're going to try to remove any tiny bit of tissue, then God forbid that will cause the fetus to abnormalities, it could kill the fetus and so on. So the amazing scientific breakthrough they made is that you don't have to go to touch the fetus, you just touch the placenta, and the placenta has the genetic material of both the mother and the fetus, half of a fella, what they're able to do. So there is something very, very magical about the placenta. There's no question about it. It's crazy. I would agree. It sounds crazy, and I'm not advocating at all. I don't think there's any value to it. But there is something magical about the placenta. And so the shaila is as follows. This woman asked me, is it mutar al pi halacha for her to eat her own, it's Basar Adam. So Basar Adam is a sugya in Simin Pei Aleph. Would that be mutar? So there was someone wrote a tshuva. It was an avrech from Torah Moshe who wrote a tshuva. It looked pretty good, but I wasn't going to paskin based on stam somebody's tshuva ba'alma. So I asked Rav Nevensal, and he said, yeah, he thought it was mutar. That's the case. He thought that's pirsha ba'alma, and he paskin that's mutar. So this woman ate the placenta. So what's fascinating is that on the one hand, it's going to be aser for Basar Bchalav, but the placenta itself is pirsha ba'alma, and there were great poskim that were matter based on that. Fascinating.
Can we make some flesh shakes?
So what is a cannibal is a cannibal fleshik, right? By the way, he's down on that in the tshuva. He's down on that. The question in general is if a person doesn't, that's going to get us to what we're eventually going to be learning in Simin Pei Test. We're getting there shortly. What happens if you don't chew at all and you just swallow? If you swallow a pill, that's I don't know if they chew it. I was a little bit spooked out. I didn't ask for all the details, but maybe I should. I don't know if they chew it or not, whether it comes mamash as a pill or. Okay, fine. Time to move on. Okay, so now the third sugya over here is what the Pri Megadim raises in Sifkatan Chaf Beis. The Pri Megadim raises the following issue. There's a problem over here. The halacha over here says that when it comes to the bones are going to be considered Basar Bchalav. Now, what type of bones are we talking about? So, the Pri Megadim says that the Minchas Yaakov learned that we're talking about bones that are soft, bones that in theory would be edible. But if we're talking about bones that are mamish inedible, then it's not even an Isser D'Rabbanan. It's not even Isser D'Rabbanan. But the Pri Megadim disagrees. The Pri Megadim says, V'lo, and this gets involved in Siman Sadi Tes, the Shach Sifkat and Aleph, Ayin Sham. I'm not going to get involved that we haven't learned it yet, but you should take a look. And the Pri Megadim says, the Kan Mash, V'lo v'nasi, the Kan Mashma, that Samos HaKoshim Nami Osrim Basar B'chalav Midrabbanan. He says the Pashtus over here is that it says all bones that are going to be Aser. Okay, so this is a machlokas between the Minchas Yaakov. Is there an Isser D'Rabbanan, a Basar B'chalav, on bones that are hard, or only bones that on some level are soft and edible? So that's a machlokas. Comes along the Pri Megadim, and the Pri Megadim says, I'll make this a pshat machlokas. This is sharp. Take a look what the Pri Megadim does. He says like this. He says, the Mechaber says, Tilfayim Arakim. If you have the hard hooves of the animal, that's Pashat, that won't be Basar B'chalav. But the soft part of the hooves, I don't know, I'm not a big mumcha on the hooves. I'm not one of those people that's demonstrating and being run over by the horse's hooves here in Israel. So I don't know exactly exactly what we're talking about in the horse's hooves over here. But at the end of the day, there are soft parts of the horse's hooves. That's going to be Basar B'chalav Midrabbanan. The part of the hoof that's really hard, that's not going to be even Basar B'chalav Midrabbanan. So says the Pri Megadim, how do you read this? Do you say the Harakim is going back on Karnayim and Atzamos and so on and so forth? Or do you say it's going on all Atzamos? So he says, Minchas Yaakov, if you want, in Pshat, you could claim that the word Karnai, the word Harakim is going back also on Atzamos. And therefore you could have the Minchas Yaakov's heter and say that bones that are mamish hard are not going to be problematic. Oh, so what emerges then is that if you have Atzamos that are hard, according to the Minchas Yaakov, it's going to be mutter. So the point is that when you have something that reaches a certain place, that it's mamish, not basar, so then it's not going to be problematic. The question is, does it make sense that if when it comes to the hooves that are soft, it's going to be considered Basar B'chalav, but when it's hard, it's not going to be Basar B'chalav. Yet, when it comes to the bones, even hard bones are going to be problematic to create Basar B'chalav. So at this moment, Rav Miller Shlita brought in the sugya of Achshevei, and he said it could very well be that if you have something that originally started out as being part of a cheftza of machalas asuros, even if people normally don't eat it, but you decide that you want to eat it, it could be that it's now going to be considered food. And this is the sugya of Achshevei. The sugya of Achshevei is an important sugya. So first of all, I photocopied for you. The sugya of Achshevei is a Rosh. The Rosh created the sugya of Achshevei, even though he didn't use the term of Achshevei. The Rosh in Psachim speaks about chametz that's nifsal le'achilas kelev. That the halacha is that nifsal me'achilas kelev is mutter ba'ana. So the Rosh is in Siman Aleph in Perek Sheni Psachim. In your booklet, in your grandfather's edition of the Rosh, it's page 248, 5 lines from the top. Shenifsal milechal kelev dumya de pas sheipsha yeshirotzim lomar lav dafka hana dua dinami achila da'afra ba'almahu. There are some say that once something is nifsal me'achilas kelev, so then it's going to be mutter not only ba'ana, but you could eat it as well. The Rosh though disagrees. He says v'lo mistaber da'afal pi de batla de betela das ochel etzel kol adam. Even though most people don't eat moldy bread, kivan di'iu ka'achalei aser v'kakasev aribar tziloni. So the Rosh says that when it comes to something that's nifsal me'achilas kelev, if you decided that you want to eat it, so then we say, Achshevei, my favorite story about nifsal me'achilas kelev from Rav Soloveitchik, I'll probably end up saying this a few times this man, is that Rav Soloveitchik was giving shir about nifsal me'achilas kelev, and he started talking lemaisa, and one of the boys asked him, what's the story with toothpaste? And he said, toothpaste is nifsal me'achilas kelev. So one boy spoke up in shir. He said, Rebbe, my dog eats my toothpaste. So Soloveitchik glared at him and he said, as your dog is stupid. Soloveitchik passled him that he's not, this Kelev doesn't have a din, can't be machriya, the din of nifsal me'achilas Kelev. It's a gevaldik brisker maisa. So at the end of the day, so maybe a dog can't have Achshevei if Soloveitchik decided that dog can't create Achshevei, so it can't create Achshevei. But at the end of the day, a person, you couldn't say that the person is stupid. In other words, the person himself, if he decides to eat, so then in such a case, then the halacha would be what? Then the halacha would be that he's over the Isser Daraisa Chametz. Now, I want to just point out something geschmack, subtle, it doesn't have much of a nafkamina, but I think it's an important editorial comment, and that is the term Achshevei the Rush never used. And as we grow up hearing the term Achshevei, the earliest source that I'm aware of is a Taz. The Taz is the one who introduces it. Achshevei, it's the last page in your booklet, Siman Taf Mem Beis, in Hilchos Chametz B'Pesach, when he quotes the Yisod of the Rush in Sivkat and Ches and the Taz, he says, Afagav Deinu Roy Lachil, Mikol Mokum Iu Achshevei Lachil. So that's where, if you were searching where the term came from, so when I read the Rush, I was like, it doesn't say Achshevei. So the Taz was the one who introduced it, and of course, that took on a life of its own, the whole sugya of Achshevei. So that's the halacha. So it is interesting when you have something that it's not normal at all for a person to eat. It could be that Tatsamos Rakin, some people do eat. Most people don't, but some people do. Tatsamos that no one does, but maybe the moment in which someone eats it, you could say Achshevei. Or even whether you're going to use it to be Majlis Halacha, Stam, when we have something that's no longer considered is no longer considered an ochel, so then in such a case, you do have the rule of Achshevei. You'll ask a question, you'll say, but what about the fact that when it came to the shilya, so shilya is not a kasha at all, because the shilya was never considered Isser altogether, because the shilya is pirsha, is in general pirsha ba'alma. So when you eat the shilya itself, which brings it back to the question of basar b'chalav. So how could you have basar b'chalav? That's why I wonder how you could have basar b'chalav on the shilya yesh ladan. But at the end of the day, this is what comes out, and we do. If we learn Isser v'heter, you need to know the sugya of Achshevei. So this is where our Rabbeim taught the sugya. So it makes sense for me to teach it over here as well. This is the basics of the sugya of Achshevei. Now, there is a important heter, so that means, again, nachamo, what it means is if you have something that's nifsal, but at the end of the day, if the individual himself treats it as food, then the Rush said that we have the rule of Achshevei. Does everybody agree with the chiddush of Achshevei? There are questions. Yes, Allah.
There's a clarification question.
Yes.
How does Achshevei explain the difference between hooves that only Rakim are considered to be Basar?
So you're right. We're going to get stuck. If we're going to try to be masbir the halach of Atzamos, about Atzamos kashos, based on Achshevei, then the question will become, what about hooves that are right? So the answer might have to do with the fact that the hooves was never ochel in the first place. The hard hoof was never ochel in the first place. But the Atzamos, when it was part of the food, definitely was considered ochel. That's almost, there's room to argue that when it was part of the food, it was still considered part of the ochel.
When it's almost part of the food, like
By the way, that atzamos themselves could go through different stages. There are times that atzamos could be soft, and times that atzamos could be hard. Depends on how well it's been cooked, etc., etc. That's going to get involved with Sadi Tes Aleph, how you look at atzamos in general, in terms of being mitzdarif l'isr, mitzdarif l'heter, and ayin sham. So I am not answering your question fully because I don't feel like we're ready to take on Atzamos entirely. I'm just pointing out that when it comes to the sugya of Atzamos, it could be that the sugya of Achshevei is relevant, although there are definitely, if you look at it as Pirsha Ba'alma, just like we have Pirsha Ba'alma, you won't say Achshevei and Pirsha Ba'alma, so too you wouldn't say Achshevei over here. Yeah?
All these things, they're not also because we're saying they're not normally eaten, or that they're not basar like
Yesh ladon. Yesh ladon. Shilya seems to be in one direction, but yesh ladon on everything else. Nachon? Yesh ladon. Yeah.
Maybe more shafta later on, but what about the moch inside the...
That for sure is considered ochel.
Yeah?
The edible moch is considered ochel, and that will be enough to...
So wouldn't that come with most, like...
Ein Hanami. We're in the world of theory right now. We're in the world of theory. Ein Hanami. Most atzamos is considered problematic. By the way, this was a machlokus between Moshe Feinstein and Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that they both realized that there was no machlokus between them. That Reb Moshe held that there wasn't a problem of putting bones on the fire before Shabbos in cases of Shem Yechat B'Gacholim, etc., etc. Reb Shlomo Zalman was machmir, and Rav Nebenzahl told me there were a few times that Rav Moshe and Rav Shlomo Zalman spoke over the phone. I imagine that Rav Moshe visited Eretz Yisrael a couple of times. Rav Shlomo Zalman never left Eretz Yisrael. They spoke to each other on the phone a couple of times, and I think it was in a conversation. Oh, how does it go? Yeah, there was a diyun back and forth that someone came to Rav Shlomo. One of Rav Moshe Feinstein, now I'm remembering it. One of Rav Moshe Feinstein's Talmidim came to Rav Shlomo Zalman to ask, how could it be that Rav Shlomo Zalman was machmir on bones? Rav Shlomo Zalman said, what are you talking about? He said, people here eat the bones. So Talmud went back to Rav Moshe, and so Rav Moshe said, now I know we're disagreeing. We're not really disagreeing. In America, there's more meat, there's more food, and people tend not to eat the bones. In Eretz Yisrael, we're poorer, and since we're poorer, people are more likely to eat the bones. So that's why Reb Shlomo Zalman assumed that it was ochel, and Rav Moshe was assuming that it wasn't ochel in terms of bishul and the chshasha shem yechata, etc., on Shabbos. So what I'm bringing out is that it does come up. In general, though, we assume that if there's edible marrow, that it could very well be considered ochel. So we're assuming...
It could turn the entire bone into ochel.
Right, it could turn... So the answer to that is the Pri Megadim raises that question as well. Whether you could differentiate between the outside of the bone and the inside of the bone, the Pri Megadim raises that question also. Take a look there in Sif Katan Chav Beis. Now, when discussing this, Rav Miller Shlita mentioned a fascinating machlokis in regards. This is I guess it's apropos for Siman Pei Aleph, another what teenagers would call gross discussion. In Siman Pei Aleph Sif Aleph, the discussion of urine and whether urine is considered a machal asur comes up. Take a look in Siman Pei Aleph Sif Aleph. It could be you guys don't have it in your edition. My edition starts from Siman Pei Aleph. Some of you might just have to look on the computer. So the Mechaber says as follows. He says, we're talking about hayotze min hatame tame. So chalav behema v'chai tmei otreifa v'tzira umei raglea asurim kibesara. That not only is it asur to eat meat from behema tmeya, it's also asur to drink its urine. By the way, in cases of pikuach nefesh and so on, this comes up. Just for survival information, that the first parts of the urine, from what I understand, are poisonous. That's where some of the unhealthy stuff that the kidney produces to help to process the urine comes out. But most of what comes out afterwards is all just water. So in cases of survival, unfortunately, it's happened where human beings have to drink their own urine to survive. So just in terms of whether it's machalas asuris or not, so the Mechaber says if we're talking about chol behema tmeya, he says it's asur, and then he says v'yesh mi shematir meiragleha. And there are some who are matir meiragleha. Now the poskim discuss if things don't change. Once upon a time, there were doctors who thought they didn't have this idea with the placenta, but they had this idea that urine was actually a healthy thing to drink from behema tmeya. So this is how it comes up, that the poskim discuss this, whether urine is mutter to drink. So it's a machlokis between the Rosh and the Rambam. If you see in the parentheses, the Rambam says mutter, v'yesh mi shematir, while the Mechaber says that mei raglayim is going to be aser. So Rav Miller reported from Rav Zalman Nechemi Goldberg Zatzal that Rav Zalman Nechemi Goldberg wanted to say that the rush is l'shitaso. This is the shitas harash. The one who holds that mei raglayim is aser is a shitas harash. So you could say, look at it two ways. You could say that the rush held that mei raglayim is considered mamish part of the animal itself. But that's a little bit hard to understand. Why should it be part of the animal? If we got through saying that the placenta is a pirsha ba'alma, l'chura urine is a pirsha ba'alma. So that's where the Rav Zalman Nechemia wanted to say that the rush is l'shitasa, that the rush is going to hold that there's a din of Achshevei. Now, according to this, you will have to differentiate between a pirsha ba'alma that we said that there's no such thing as Achshevei, or versus urine that maybe it is more subject to it, or is it possible that you could say that Achshevei could even apply to a pirsha ba'alma? Yesh ladin. I leave that open. That I don't remember Rav Miller Shlita discussing. But what I do remember him discussing is Gishmak, that the Rosh, who's the Baal Memra of Achshevei, is also the Baal Memra from Rav Zalman Nechemi Goldberg, is also the Baal Memra that Mei Raglayim is going to be Asr, because it would be hard to understand why Mei Raglayim is really going to be considered Ra'i La'achilas Adams, Ra'i L'shtiyas Adams. So the answer is that's going to be Asr B'Toras Achshevei. While Rav Zalman Nechemia held that Achshevei would not apply according to Rambam. Rav Zalman Nechemia held that it was a machlokis between Rambam and Rush. That's Gishmak. So then you'll say, so then if the Rush paskin that the halacha is that Achshevei is Asr, and the Taz quotes in the Siman Taf Mem Beis, so then what's the heter to say that when it comes to medication on Pesach, that the medication is chametz, but it's nifsal me'achilas kelev. Now we're going to get involved what's the hagdar of nifsal me'achilas kelev when it comes to medication or not. But let's assume, like the Shita of the Chazon Ish that holds that medication that came from chametz is nifsal me'achilas kelev. But you could ask, but then there's Achshevei, that at the end of the day, if the Rosh said beferish on something that was nifsal me'achilas kelev, you could say Achshevei. So here, Ramosha Feinstein Zatzal and the Achiezer, I photocopied for you the Ramosha in Chelik Beis, Siman Sadi Beis. Ramosha says beautifully to his Talmud Rav Greenblatt. He says to him, make sure you take your medication over Pesach. Don't be machmir on yourself. He says, you'll say that's a problem of Achshevei, that it's chametz. So Ramosha said like this. Ramosha says you don't say Achshevei on something that itself is not eaten, is not consumed as a food. He says the raya is that people take medication even when it doesn't taste good. In other words, that a person, when they're taking the medication, is not because they're treating it as an ochel. It's because they're treating it as medicine. So what's the yisod of Achshevei? The yisod of Achshevei is that most people don't eat this piece of bread. Either you're weird or you're in a dire situation, and now you're treating this as bread. That's Achshevei. But there's no Achshevei on medication. Yes, you're machshevit as medication. So you're machshevit as something that's nifsal me'achilas kelev as medication. The whole point of Achshevei is you yourself are treating this as ochel. People don't treat medication as ochel, so therefore Moshe says beautifully that you don't have the problem of Achshevei when it comes to medication. Ayin Sham, Chelik Beis, Siman Sadi Beis. Tam v'nishlam, b'siyata d'shmaya. We did the three topics, the Chumras of Ashkenaz, the sugya of shilya, the sugya of meiraglaim. We will get back to normal eating habits in Mirza Hashem. Well, Maimid is fasting, so that's also not normal eating habits, but at least what comes out is normal. You have cheese that comes out that's normal. In Mirza Hashem, we will pick up with that on. I told you that I'd like to give shir on Tuesday instead of Monday. It works out better for my schedule. Hope that's okay with you. I will let you know. Right, Monday's our normal shir day. It's better for me to give on Tuesday if that's okay. Let me know if it's a problem for you, and I will let you know which classroom. Reb Ben Arsh gives shir here, so we won't be doing it in this classroom. Bli Neder will find another one. Just to conclude. As I was saying, Ramosha just reminded me of the beautiful story of Ramosha Feinstein. This is just a Sipurei Tzadikim. So there was a woman that used to call, I thought of this because it's about medication on Pesach and Ramosha. So there was a woman who used to call Ramosha every Erev Pesach and ask her and go through her lists of medications, and she would call them every year. In Mirz Hashem, you're learning to become Rabbanim, so Mirz Hashem, one day you should be Zocha, that only for good things, but you should be busy on Erev Pesach, and you should know that Erev Pesach for Rabbanim is overwhelming. So this woman would call Ramesha after Biur Chametz, or before Biur Chametz, every Erev Pesach. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and this woman gets a phone call from Ramesha Feinstein. And Ramesha says, "Hi, it's Moshe Feinstein. You didn't call me this year to ask me about your medication. And I was worried that you didn't ask the shayla." So she said, "Oh, Rabbi Feinstein, I'm using the same medication as last year, this year, so I figured you already answered me last year." That was what Ramesha was thinking about. It's almost impossible for a Rav of a shul of 50 people to be thinking straight on Erev Pesach. And that Ramesha was thinking about that almana that she didn't call to ask about, and he was scared that maybe she wasn't going to take her medication properly. That was what Ramesha was thinking about. This is the same Ramesha Feinstein. It's mind-boggling. This is the same Ramesha Feinstein that I heard a story that Ramesha got so many shilas at once. Around Sukkot time, people would come to the Lower East Side and ask Ramesha show him their esrog. So Ramesha used to see so many esrogim. They say Ramesha, it's known that before davening and after davening would learn Mishnayos. So Ramesha would continue learning Mishnayos, and his head would be in the sefer, and his hand would be out. He wouldn't look up at the people. It was known that you just put the esrog in his hand. Ramesha would look at it and just say what he thought. So there was one guy who thought that Ramesha didn't really answer him properly in the esrog. He didn't see what was bothering him in the esrog. So there are a couple dozen people going around. Ramesha is looking in the Mishnayos, he's looking at it, and he's saying, it's lechatchila, b'diavad, v'chulei. Ramesha looks at the esrog, he doesn't look up, he said, "You asked me already," and he puts it back to the same Ramesha Feinstein that remembered that the woman hadn't called him for medication.